All right, we are back here on the podcast, getting ready for another NHL playoff check here. The Rangers have advanced to the Eastern Conference Finals and now got the Carolina Hurricanes in 6 games. Joining me today, as he's been doing throughout the postseason, to preview the next Rangers series here, the host of the Sports the Waiting Room podcast, Christopher Russo, is here with us. Christopher, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Mike. Appreciate you having me back.
Yeah, I also think the NHL players will appreciate you growing the playoff beer in solidarity with them over the course of the postseason.
Yeah, I've tended to do this for a long time. You get deeper and deeper, and it gets worse in terms of the shave. But I look more like Grizzly Adams, and I start
Yeah,
making Happy Gilmore references,
yeah.
and it's working out. It's filling out, and maybe not. Well, again, for the audio only listener, I think it's not really filling out around this area, around the cheek,
Yeah.
but otherwise pretty good.
Yeah, it's definitely a solid postseason beard here, and the Rangers definitely keep growing theirs here. They win in 6 games. They knock out the Hurricanes here. So, give your general takeaways from this series here. The Rangers go up 3-0. They had a little bit of a panic where they lose the two in a row, and then they come back from 3-1 down in Game 6 and win in this third period, a massive comeback.
Yeah, it's funny, Mike. I will say after I had picked the Rangers to win that series, I even said, I think it was after game 5 that I had said on my podcast, I'm still taking the Rangers to win this in 7 games. And we probably expected this to go 6 or 7 regardless. But the fact that it was 3-0 Rangers and then you still get to a game 6, that was probably more the concern for the Rangers. I honestly thought once Carolina won game 5, you look at the way things work now in a 3-0 series, in a best of 7, the way things work now, where it's a 2-2, 1-1-1 instead of a 2-3-2 in terms of home ice, the toughest game to win as the road team down 3-0 is game 5. Game 5 at the Garden would have been the toughest. So Carolina got over the worst of it and was looking destined to force a game 7, which it seems more than likely they would have won. But yeah, Rangers making that comeback, ultimately stunning. I thought after game 5 that Carolina was actually going to win that series. And I had made the point too that they would have been, New York would have been the first city to have multiple teams blow 3-0 leads, which would have been insane.
Yeah,
Going back to, yeah,
that's true. Obviously, going back to the Yankees 04 would be the one that I'm thinking of.
that's the only one. And so that was a very interesting point. But it's funny, you also figured Carolina was due to win a game considering the Rangers won 3 1-goal games. Games I think they probably earned, but ultimately it was 3 1-goal games, and 2 of them went to overtime. One went to double overtime. And honestly, that Jordan Staal goal was maybe looked like it was going to be the defining point of the series if Carolina won, because it was just a poor effort by Schneider. Staal is not that fast. I don't think he's ever been that fast, and he just maneuvers his way around him. But still, that was a stunning game 6 that even if the Rangers do get knocked out, even if they get swept by Florida, that's something people are going to remember for a long time. I've heard from a number of Ranger fans, okay, Chris Kreider's getting his number retired now, as if he probably wasn't already. But really, that's something that makes it almost seem like they're destined to win.
Yeah, for sure here. And interesting thought know about that series as well here is obviously when they win the game in overtime in game 3, I texted like a friend of mine's a big Rangers. I'm like, oh, like that's the kill shot. Like the series is pretty much over here. And then it looked like obviously like there were 2 points. It looked like it was going to be momentum was swinging big time towards Carolina, which was when they finally get the first power play goal in game 4, which they had they've been 0 for 15 the series prior to that. And then you have game 2, you have games like this the play. I think it was Martinook in game 6 who sweeps the puck out of the net right before it fully crossed the goal line. You see that, you're thinking, like they might not have the momentum here. The fact they got it back is incredible.
Yeah, that was a huge one. That Martinook one, you think, oh, they're dead in the water at that point. The fact that the Rangers continued to fight after that was remarkable. And it's funny, you keep going to those comparisons in game 6 with Kreider to Messier and the hat trick and all of that. But I think another comparison you can make there is that Igor Shesterkin stood on his head after it got to 3-1. He made a number of grade A saves. Plus, Carolina hit the post a couple of times. I think at least one of those, Shesterkin actually would probably ultimately be credited with a save, because really it went back into him and then he was able to cover it. But he was reminiscent of Mike Richter in game 6 against the Devils, where it was 2-0 and Mike Richter stood on his head. The Devils were pounding them and he just said, no, we're not going home tonight. They kept that thing alive.
Yes, for sure here. And obviously, the other guy here, we talked a little bit about the Messier parallels here. The Chris Kreider natural hat trick in the third period. They're down 3-1. He gets the three in a row to put the Rangers up 4-3 here. And for a guy who's been here forever and has been a big playoff performance forever here, like this has to be like his defining moment of his career here. This Chris Kreider getting the hat trick to carry the Rangers through in a situation where it looked like this is going down the drain fast.
One of the most insane stats that I've realized over the last couple of weeks is that Chris Kreider now will have been to as many conference finals or Stanley Cup semifinals as Bobby Orr.
Yeah.
Chris Kreider's been to 5 Eastern Conference finals now. That's as many as that whole Pittsburgh gang, the Crosby, Malkin, Letang grouping. Mario Lemieux only got to 4. And look, obviously, there's Stanley Cup being won in that stretch. Chris Kreider hasn't won the cup yet, but he is quietly one of the best playoff performers of his generation, one of the most underappreciated playoff performers in the history of the Stanley Cup playoffs, at least in the modern, 16-team, 16-win era, because he's already the franchise's all-time leader in playoff goals. He is, what is he? I think he's third in regular season goals. He's really a pure goal scorer, and he's not a great point scorer necessarily. And, he's lacked in terms of hockey IQ at times, but he's an underappreciated shooter. There is maybe nobody better at deflecting the puck than he is. And he's a complete player because he's able to play on the PK, he's able to play on the power play, and he's a good team player. That I thought that there were a couple of times that I thought when the Rangers had captaincy vacancies, I thought he was going to be named the captain, but the truth is they have so many leaders in that dressing room that it just makes a lot of sense for him. But he is the anchor for this team at this point.
Yeah, for sure here. And I do think we learned a lot about the Rangers this series as well, especially going with the adversity here. And the one thing that surprised me going into this series was obviously it felt like they were getting no respect from either the sports books, the odds makers, or the analytics models. Whereas I remember prior to this year, I placed a bet on the Rangers at plus 140 to advance out of the round, which felt like a lot. And I've seen the Athletics predictive model have the Hurricanes a 66% chance of winning here, which goes to show you, I think, in my opinion, that you can't just look at metrics or hit fancy plays and advanced stats. But a team like this that has a great goaltender and just has more guts, I feel like the Hurricanes. I think that's something that doesn't get valued enough and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, it's funny. Going into this series, you figured, okay, 2 years ago, the Rangers knocked out the Hurricanes, and the Hurricanes had home ice in that series too. And it was very, very surprising. I thought that Carolina was that anybody is favored against any President's Trophy winner. But it's fun. It's a Ranger team that's been disrespected at times by the media, by officials at times, and it's been the last few years. You keep hearing this whole thing, and to an extent, it's true. But you keep hearing this narrative of, oh, they can't play at 5-on-5. Obviously, they win enough that they can play at 5-on-5 to a certain extent. Look, do they lean on the power play and the PK a lot more? Yeah, but if you can be better on the PK, that should be more impressive on your part anyway. There's the whole, the power play merchants narrative, that whole saga. And look, they're a good hockey team. They're a deep hockey team. They're better than they were last year. They're probably better than they were 2 years ago. They've had time and time again where I can name you 4, 5, 6 times where they should have and could have won the Stanley Cup in the last 15 years or so. Is it going to be different this time? I could not tell you, but yeah, they've been disrespected quite a lot of times. But the truth is, Carolina should have won the Stanley Cup in the last 5 years or so. It's goaltending that's kept them from winning it. And Frederik Andersen's a good goaltender, but you look at Andersen, you look at Kochetkov, you look at a few guys there, and it's been a carousel. They haven't had the guy at any given point. And maybe it's possible they haven't had that one true scorer that they were missing last year, that they were missing 2 years ago against the Rangers in the second round. They're very deep, but I don't think there's one guy that really stands out that much.
Yeah, they thought Jake Gensel was going to be that guy for them, and he had a great first round. Most of the series, he didn't do too much.
Yeah, well, it's funny, too, that, there's been a discussion. Jake Gensel has been so good against the Rangers. What does he have? I think he has almost a goal per game in the playoffs in those 2 series against them, whether it was in 2022 with Pittsburgh or 2024 with Carolina. But either way, he lost both of those series. Pittsburgh lost in the first. Pittsburgh blew a 3-0, 3-1 lead 2 years ago, and Carolina missed out on a big opportunity this year. So Gensel, I think, there's going to be a lot of changes too in Carolina. That's the other thing. They obviously made the smart decision of bringing back Rod Brindamore. All those rumors of him going to Toronto were all for naught. But they have a lot of guys going into free agency this year, and it's almost like what Tampa Bay had after 2022, where a lot of their depth pieces will need to be replaced. They'll have a lot of their core left, but a lot of their third, fourth line guys will need to be replaced, and that's part of what cost Tampa Bay the Stanley Cup in the last couple of years. Carolina doesn't even have that little, pushback of saying, oh, we won the Stanley Cup once or twice, or even they haven't even been to the finals in this window. So even more pressure on them at this point.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And obviously, we know they're playing the Panthers next round here. What do you think about what we saw in the other series here, the Panthers-Bruins series, where Florida wins in 6?
Well, I thought Boston showed a lot of resilience, and a lot of credit to Jim Montgomery and this whole Bruins squad for coming back from winning the President's Trophy, blowing a 3-1 lead in the first round, setting the record for points and wins in a regular season, and blowing a 3-1 lead and losing in the first round, and yet still coming back, still finishing second in their division. For a long time, it looked like they were going to finish first, and then they blew that at the end of the season. But without Brad Marchand, they still came back, won a Game 5 in Sunrise to force Game 6, but a real heartbreaker on that Forsling goal in Boston. I will say, though, this was probably the ultimate performance to this point, the best performance to this point by Jeremy Swayman. He is not the reason they lost this series. This was a generally pretty low-scoring series, it appeared. I think the issue with the Bruins is not a lack of depth. They have good depth, but the truth is, if you have Morgan Geekie and Charlie Coyle playing top 3, playing first-line minutes, that doesn't seem like a team that's going to win the Stanley Cup. And look, they obviously were lacking without Marchand. Marchand I think Marchand might have still finished as their leading scorer despite missing, 2-3 games in this series alone. So Pasternak is going to need a lot of protection, and that's tough without Marchand. And of course, Bergeron is retired. So there's a lot missing from this team. I think they can retool very easily, but Florida ultimately did their job. Sergei Bobrovsky, I think, got better as the playoffs went on. He looked better in this series than he did against Tampa Bay. It was much lower scoring, and I think it again shows that Florida can play a lower scoring style of hockey.
Yeah, sure. And obviously, we're getting ready for this Rangers-Panthers series here, and much like the last round, the Rangers are underdogs again. They're not as steep this time. I think prior to our record, I think they were plus 120 in the series odds here. Athletics predictive model basically had them as a 35% chance to win the series. Just does again seem pretty low, certainly on the President's Trophy here. But you and I talk more the postseason. The Panthers are the team that gives the Rangers the most problems here. You want to reiterate to everybody why you think that is, why this is such a tough matchup for the Rangers to get here.
Well, first and foremost, when I was working on notes for this podcast, I accidentally typed what makes the Rangers such a tough matchup for the Rangers, which sounds pretty appropriate because they're a team that could shoot themselves in their foot and certainly has at times in the postseason. But I would say, for one thing, it's been a while since they have played a player in the postseason the likes of Matthew Tkachuk, because even Jack Hughes last year, Jack Hughes is one of the better players in the league and one of the more commanding and probably the most commanding presence for the Devils, is definitely a number one guy. But even then, he didn't show up that much in that series last year. And you have Alex Ovechkin, who is maybe the greatest pure goal scorer of all time, maybe the greatest player of his generation. But this year, obviously, he's a shell of what he once was. He got a lot better over the course of the regular season, but did nothing in the playoffs. Matthew Tkachuk was a Hart Trophy finalist last year, probably would have won the Conn Smythe had the Panthers won the Stanley Cup last year. And he is so much stronger. But I think the fact that they've added such good pieces around him, like Sam Reinhart, like Sam Bennett, they've built so well. They have a certified number one goaltender in Sergei Bobrovsky, even though he struggled a little bit at times. And you have a coach in Paul Maurice who is so experienced and is so hungry for the Stanley Cup. It's a Florida team that is very, very hungry. They played the Rangers very well in the regular season. I think the biggest issue in their middle game of the two. That was their second game. That was at the first game at the Garden, the second game between the two. Igor Shesterkin let up a bad goal in a 2-2 game. And then the Rangers later on won a shootout in that third game of the regular season. So they haven't beaten them in pure overtime rules yet, in pure playoff rules yet. So that's the big thing. But it's just a lot of depth, a lot of skill, and especially shown by this Boston series, a lot of good defense from this Florida team. These are two teams that match up very favorably. They're pretty similar teams, I would argue, based on skating ability.
Yeah, I would agree with that here. And obviously, like, it's something as you're a Ranger fan, you're concerned that, like, your one victory against them in the regular season came in overtime with a shootout, where it's not going to happen in the postseason. So, what do the Rangers have to do here to play better against Florida to try and win this series?
I would say first and foremost is it's just going to be the difference. It's not going to be everything, but just judging based on that second game, I'm going with the performance of Igor Shesterkin off the top of my head. He was very important in this series, even though it was a little higher scoring against Carolina. You had a couple of 4-3 games. You had a 5-3 game in Game 6, but he made a lot of grade A stops in Games 1, Game 2, in the games at the Garden in particular, Games 1, Games 2, and then also Game 6 in Carolina. So it's how many stops can he make? Can he make the reasonable stops? That's going to be the biggest question. Can he make the stops that he should make? Because we know he's probably going to save a few goals. And it's just a matter of Florida. Can you get pucks on net consistently over and over again and eventually just try to squeak one through?
Yeah, I think also for sure, the question I think that the Rangers have to figure out here is that 12th forward, what they're going to do with that spot here. Because obviously, like, they only played Rempe and Holden games and sheltered him where he was playing very limited minutes. They were double shifting the bigger guys towards the end of the game. Giant Brodzinski got a few games, and Carolina didn't do too much. Filipino played one game, looked good, but then like had the soreness and the illness. It wasn't seen from him again. We know Blake Wheeler is trying to get back. He's shed the non-contact jersey at practice here, so they have options here what to do with that last spot. So I think what they do with that will be very important in this series. Where I think like I know Rempe brings physicality, but like it's hard when you're playing a team as deep as Florida is to be double shifting your big guys.
Yeah, well, I think the best news for the Rangers is that you think about it, is there anybody left in this postseason, save for, I don't know, to an extent, Evander Kane maybe, who really is a rough customer remotely the likes of Tom Wilson? Because that's why Rempe played so much in the first round, because Tom Wilson had bullied the Rangers and frankly gotten away with it for quite some time. They needed somebody like Matt Rempe to go back after him, and pretty much the whole eye for an eye makes the world go blind, but the Rangers needed the eye for an eye at that point. Carolina doesn't quite have a person like that, and I don't think Florida really has someone like that either. So I don't expect to see that much of Rempe in this series. Hedl depends on his health. Whatever issues he is having, I don't think it's related to whatever head issues that he had in the past. I don't think the whole illness thing, because some people have speculated that, I don't think the whole illness thing or anything like that is a cover. I think he's actually okay. I think he's past that. But to see him would be something for the Rangers. Anything, even a shell of what he was 2 years ago on that kid line, that was probably the most consistent line for that team in the playoffs, would be huge. I think Brodzinski has looked good at times. I think, a lot of people gave Barclay Goodrow a lot of flack for the regular season and maybe even parts of last season with the Rangers, but he's looked good this postseason. So he's another one that you can appreciate. I think it's been a very complete 12 forward effort, but yeah, there's going to be a lot. Blake Wheeler, I don't think there's a big need for him right now, but he is definitely a good locker room presence. I think you're going to see that even if he's a scratch, but I think the fact that he is practicing again is something very refreshing, because it seemed like he was not going to play at all this season. Same goes for Hedl, of course.
Yeah, and even if Blake Wheeler doesn't make the ice here, like he's like, every team postseason, you always look for that old guy who doesn't have a cup yet. Like Blake Wheeler is the Ranger example of that guy, basically. Where he's been around forever, doesn't have a cup, and like even if he can't get on the ice, like he'd be somebody who like you want to see him lift that cup.
Well, even more than that, he's not only a guy who has been around for that long, he was a captain in Winnipeg for a long time. He is perhaps the best player in the history of that franchise. He's American born. He's from Minnesota, actually really, in essence, lived about as or played about as close to home as he could have, save for maybe playing for the Wild. And so for him to be in a Ranger uniform is especially huge. But yeah, it's like watching, like watching Chemo Timonen lift the cup in Chicago after years with Philadelphia in particular, watching him finally win. You go to a much larger extent. Of course, the classic example is Ray Bourque winning in Colorado. Blake Wheeler winning would be a huge storyline. And there are a lot of guys who are younger or in the prime of their career, and they would especially want to win for him. So having him is a huge lift. A lot of inspiration, a lot of motivation for that dressing room.
Yeah, that's for sure. Let's quickly check on the Western Conference side of the bracket here. Dallas is through to the Western Conference Finals. We were recording before the Game 7 tonight between Vancouver and Edmonton in the Canadian half of the draw here. Like, what do you think we have to look forward to with the rest of the Western Conference playoffs? Do you think whoever comes out of that series can give Dallas a run for it?
Yeah, I think they can. Look, I think Edmonton not having to play Vegas or Colorado would be a significant improvement, because Dallas has been to the final, but not since the COVID year. Some call it a fluke. I wouldn't necessarily call it that, but Vegas and Colorado have been hotter as of late. They've finished the job and won the Stanley Cup the last 2 years. So I think Edmonton playing a team with not quite as much playoff experience would be significant. I personally think Edmonton is going to win this game tonight. I also honestly thought that, though, that Edmonton was going to play Nashville. I said Nashville would pull off the upset over Vancouver. I think Vancouver is a little ahead of schedule. I know that a lot of those guys are getting closer to their prime, guys like Besser, guys like JT Miller, who might be at the end of their prime perhaps. But when you look at what Rick Tocchet has done in just, a year and a half with that team, with multiple goaltenders in this postseason, he's really had to balance things out. Even for Vancouver finishing first in the division, I was very surprised to see them win a first-round series to force a Game 7 against Edmonton. And then you have Draisaitl and McDavid, who are second and fourth, respectively, in points per game in the postseason all time. Seriously, it's Gretzky, Draisaitl, Mario Lemieux, and Connor McDavid. These guys are the two best players, perhaps, of their generation. Connor McDavid might already be the best player since Mario Lemieux, and they are so due. Look, I think Vancouver's a deeper team, a better team, and I think Vancouver clearly is a hungrier hockey city at this point. But I think Edmonton is going to win this series. And Edmonton-Dallas would be pretty fun to watch. That's what I picked for the conference final at the start of the postseason. Two very different teams. Dallas much more defensive, Edmonton much more offensive. But Dallas, I think, is looking good right now.
All right, so if you had to make a pick today, like let's say, call your shot right now, who is playing in the Stanley Cup final in 2 weeks? Who you got?
As tempted as I am to take Florida because of how well they played the Rangers in the regular season, I think the Rangers are ultimately due. I'm going to say the Rangers win the East. And I think the Dallas Stars are going to win the Western Conference for the first time in 4 years. These are probably the two deepest and most fundamentally sound teams. They're good offensively. They're very good defensively. They have perhaps the two best goaltenders in the NHL. And Dallas has not won in 25 years. The Rangers have not won in 30, but they have been arguably the two best teams, at least in the last 5 years, if not since the strike or since the lockout, that have not won the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree with you on the projection here. I will make this note addition as well here. I'm calling this, regardless of how the series goes, Rangers-Panthers going 7 games. I feel like that's a mortal lock considering how even these two teams are. And I will say, if the Rangers get out of the series, they're winning the Cup. Because I feel like Florida is by far the toughest team they have left to deal with.
Well, yeah, there was only one team in the regular season that the Rangers did not beat, and that was the Vegas Golden Knights. Of course, they only played them twice, and I think the caveat is that the game in Vegas, they outplayed them in the first 15 minutes or so, but Vegas scored a couple of goals. And so Vegas is out. Vegas, defending Cup champion, gone, so that's big for the Rangers. Florida is the only other one that really gave them fits. I think Florida's the only other one that might have won the regular season series against the Rangers. So, yeah, this is going to be their toughest test, in my opinion. But you make the comparison, 1994, really the Rangers' toughest test. I know they went to 7 with Vancouver in the final, but Rangers-Devils in 94 is argued by many to be the greatest hockey series, the greatest Stanley Cup playoff series of all time. And remember, that year, the Rangers and Devils were 1 and 2 in the standings overall. Of course, Devils played in the same division, so that's why they were all the way down to, I think, the the 4 seed at least.
Yeah.
But that was the ultimate test for them. And yeah, if the Rangers win this series, I think they'll win the Stanley Cup. Florida, I don't know if you can say the same, but this might be the best series you'll see this entire postseason.
Yeah, and I think the biggest lock if you're a gambling man or woman, if you're in on this one here, series length for the series, 7 games. I think that's the biggest lock on the board.
It should be. I mean, we all thought the Rangers-Carolina series was going to go 7 games, and we figured at least it was going to go 6. It did. I could definitely see a 7-game series.
Barring something freaky with injuries, I think this is destined to go the distance.
It should, yeah.
All right, Chris, thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. People want to follow you on social media. Check out your podcast. How can they do that?
Sure. You can find me and find the podcast, Sports in the Waiting Room, on X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, at Chris Russo 98. Find me on Instagram at Chris Russo 1998. You can find a lot of clips from here. You'll probably find this individual clip as actually on there as well.
Yeah, so Chris, thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. I know we lost our Nick half of the podcast week, so hopefully we're back here 2 weeks getting ready for a Stanley Cup final preview.
We shall see.
All right, Chris, thanks for all the time.
Thanks, Mike.